When we think carbohydrates, we immediately think weight gain, right? The last thing we typically associate carbohydrates with in today's world is weight loss. And reality is that lots of carbohydrates are potentially to blame for the issues that we're dealing with in terms of being overweight and obesity. But it doesn't mean that carbs themselves are bad. Just like anything, there's good carbs and there's bad carbs. There's good fats and there's bad fats. There's even good proteins and kind of bad proteins. There's good and bad everything. There are actually carbohydrates that when you look at large scale data are really good when it comes down to fat loss. So these are the best carbohydrates for weight loss and fat loss. Let's start with number one. And that's going to be something that comes from a huge study looking at 133,000+ people over 24 years. And that is apples. It sounds so wild, especially for me because I lived so long being afraid of certain fruits because of the sugar intake. And this blew my mind. I mean, this was like apples were not what I expected, but I can also understand why. So what they did is they looked at these subjects over 4-year intervals. So they would see over the course of 4 years, what did they change with their diet? And what they found is that when fruit in general was added into their diet over these 4-year different chunks, there was an inverse relationship with their weight. They would lose weight. So fruit in general, when people made a change, so 4 years go by and then all of a sudden I'm gonna start adding fruit in, the next 4 years, magically there's a weight loss. But it seems as though apples and pears had the strongest impact. With apples and pears, it ended up being about a 1.24 pound decrease when those were added in. Now, obviously that's an average, right? So on average, when people started eating apples or pears, they lost about 1.24 pounds over that 4-year period. Now, that sounds like very little weight. The point is that this is a carb that was added in with nothing else changing, and all of a sudden this has the impact. Berries were a close second at 1.11 pounds. So yeah, it's a carbohydrate that's actually associated with more weight loss, and it makes sense. I mean, fruit is very satiating, but also apples and pears are probably some of the highest satiety score fruits that there are. This next one is a little bit of a weird one, so hear me out. It's going to be not all the way ripe bananas. Bananas that have a little bit of green in them. Now, the literature we look at is mainly related to resistant starch. Okay, so full disclaimer, you could also eat these carbohydrates as like a heated and then cooled potato. You could also heat and cool, say, a sweet potato. Anything with resistant starch, even heated and cooled rice could fall in this category, but I feel like a green or a mildly ripe banana might be a safer bet to start out if you're a little bit, just call it like it is, carb phobic, because it's a really low carbohydrate intake to begin with. So with this, we look at a rodent model study to understand what's going on. So the study was published in Nutrition and Metabolism. So it had obesity-prone rats eat ad libitum for 16 weeks. So they just ate as much as they wanted to, and a lot of them became obese. Then they had them reduce their body weight by 17% via a specific diet. I know it's very specific. And then for 18 weeks, they went on a maintenance diet that just kept them where they were. Then they put them into 2 groups, a higher resistant starch group or a low resistant starch group. The high resistant starch group ended up eating significantly less, but they also ended up storing less subcutaneous fat. They ended up eating closer to their energy balance. That's what was kind of interesting, is when they reverse engineered everything, they're like, this is odd. Like, they're naturally just eating right in line with their energy balance. Like, they're having this much output, this is their input. So resistant starch, whether it's related to the gut microbiome or it's just purely satiating, seem to really have some powerful effects at just bringing almost energy homeostasis to these rodents. And we see similar literature with humans. When resistant starch is added in, then they eat less, but they also have a remodeling of the gut microbiome that lowers inflammation, improves insulin sensitivity, lowers HbA1c. It's all kinds of really interesting stuff. I went ahead and I put a link down below for a brand that is a sponsor on this channel, but I thought that it was relevant with this video. By all means, you don't have to go for it, but I think it's worth looking at. It's a company called Seed. They are a synbiotic, so they have prebiotic fiber and a probiotic in one capsule inside of a capsule. Pretty cool technology. So when people are looking at weight loss or weight management and they're thinking about doing things for their gut health, their gut microbiome, obviously adding resistant starch is powerful, fiber is powerful, but a big piece that a lot of people look to is going to be a good quality probiotic, and a lot of them are just not good. They're cheap, they're white labeled, they're just the same old like denatured, probably not surviving bacteria. Seed has done a really good job and they're paving the way with a lot of the microbiome research. So I'm a huge fan of them. They're the only probiotic that I recommend, literally. And I put a link down below so that you can save 25% off if you want to try them out. So 25% off a daily symbiotic from Seed, so you can get it from a company that's actually doing the legwork and the research themselves. So again, that link is down below in the top line of this description. This next one I was very happy to see because it's one that I eat a lot of, and that is sweet potatoes. Now, there's a study published in Nutrients that took a look at 58 white-collar corporate workers, so people that were probably high stress, sitting down a lot. Put them on a normal diet or a normal diet plus 132 grams twice per day of sweet potatoes, so just 2 packs of sweet potatoes. The group that had the sweet potatoes had a 5% reduction in body weight, even though calories didn't really change too much, and they had a 3.5% decrease in their HbA1c. So the glycemic control plus the satiety aspect. But then if we look at another paper, there was a study that took a look at type 2 diabetics, and it gave them just a small serving of sweet potato skin extract daily. And the results were really fascinating with these people. It improved their insulin sensitivity, lowered their fasting glucose, lowered their HbA1c, reduced their inflammation markers. So with this, we kind of understand, especially in someone that is dealing with high glucose or high levels of insulin, there's actually some antioxidant, anti-inflammatory properties that are coming into play that are having a secondary impact independent of the resistant starch and the fibers with the sweet potatoes. So when it comes down to a carb that really is going to be hard to overdo, it's going to be sweet potato or any kind of tuber. It's just hard to eat a ton of them. Now this next one is kind of a carb, but also kind of not, but technically it is. It's going to be cruciferous vegetables specifically. So we're talking broccoli, kale, cauliflower, bok choy, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, things like that. That same study that I talked about when I was talking about the fruit, PLOS1, that looked at 133,000 people, it found very similar relationships when it was looking at starches with these cruciferous vegetables and overall weight loss. There was an inverse relationship between cruciferous vegetable intake and weight loss. Now, this is fascinating because we know the fiber intake, but we also know their estrogen modulating properties. Now, estrogen can trigger, especially in men, testosterone to convert into more estrogen, right? So estrogen, aromatase, body fat, aromatase. So you have this vicious cycle. The more estrogen you have, the more testosterone you convert into estrogen because the more body fat that you essentially store. So because you're kind of potentially getting rid of this rate limiting step to a certain degree or reducing it, you have less body fat. So that's a big piece too. Also the anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects. So I know it's not a traditional carb, but like maybe electing for a cauliflower crust pizza or something may not be a bad idea. Now the last one I need to talk about is going to be legumes. We're talking about chickpeas, we're talking about lentils, things like that. Even hummus, just adding it into the diet. Here's what's super interesting about this though. There was a study published in Nutrients that took a look at 15,000 people over a 10-year period. What they discovered here is that legumes were definitely associated with weight loss. Inverse relationship. The more legumes consumed, the more weight loss. However, when they accounted for fiber and they adjusted fiber intake and they sort of canceled that out, so in other words, they basically made it so that they still ate lentils but balanced out fiber intake by reducing it elsewhere, when they looked at this, there was no change. So what does this tell us if we break it down? What it tells us is that legumes don't seem to have any magical property to them other than the fact that they're high in fiber. So what do we learn from this? Is it that legumes aren't effective? I mean, I think legumes are a great bulk. Like if I'm gonna have a bowl, like a Mediterranean bowl, I'm gonna have legumes over rice because legumes are almost not a free food. Like they have things that can be bad, like high amounts of starch if you overdo it. But at the end of the day, like it's almost a free food in a way, much better than say rice in this particular case. Now, legumes are associated with weight loss, but it's only because of the fiber. So what this tells us is that carbs may not be terrible if we can balance them out with fiber. Like what's the common denominator with a lot of these? Cruciferous vegetables, lots of water, lots of fiber. You got apples and pears and berries, lots of fiber, lots of water. We've got green bananas, resistant starch, a very potent kind of fiber. We've got legumes, lentils, things like that, resistant starch and a lot of fiber. And then, hey, what do you know? We have sweet potatoes, resistant starch and a lot of fiber. So you can see the common theme here. It doesn't mean that other carbohydrates are bad, but these are definitely the ones you're going to want to lean into more if you want a carbohydrate fix without all the guilt. I'll see you tomorrow.